night stories, where nightmares become to life and shadows appear in the corners.
Elias turned the key in the lock for the first time, the brass handle cool and unfamiliar under his palm. The door creaked open, revealing a dim hallway where dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light filtering through grimy windows. He'd bought the place sight unseen, a foreclosure deal too good to pass up after the divorce drained his savings. Sarah had taken the apartment in the city, along with most of their shared life, leaving him to rebuild in this quiet suburb on the edge of town. The house was old, built in the 70s, with sagging eaves and a yard overgrown with weeds that whispered against the siding in the breeze. He stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under his boots. The air smelled of stale wood and faint mildew, like the house had been holding its breath for years. Elias dropped his duffel bag by the stairs and wandered through the empty rooms. The living room had a brick fireplace, cold and unused, with a mantel bare except for a faint outline where pictures might have hung. In the kitchen, cabinets hung slightly askew, and the linoleum peeled at the edges. He flicked on the faucet. Water sputtered out, brown at first, then clearing to a trickle. Unpacking took the rest of the day. Elias hauled boxes from his truck, stacking them in the corners. He wasn't one for sentiment. Most of his things were practical, tools from his carpentry days, books on history he'd collected during quieter times, back when he and Sarah dreamed of fixing up a place together before arguments turned to silence. He paused in the master bedroom, staring at the faded wallpaper patterned with vines that seemed to twist in the fading light. The previous owners, the realtor had said, were an elderly couple who'd passed away suddenly. No details beyond that. The house came as is, contents included if he wanted them. By evening, hunger drove him to town for groceries. The locals at the corner store eyed him curiously but said little. "New to the old Miller place?" the cashier asked, bagging his bread and canned soup. Elias nodded. "Quiet neighborhood," she added, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Keeps to itself." He drove back as dusk settled, the house's silhouette looming against the darkening sky. Lights from neighboring homes flickered on. But his stood dark until he flipped the switches inside. That night, sleep evaded him. The bed was a mattress on the floor, and every shift caused the springs to protest. Outside, wind rattled the branches against the roof, a rhythmic tapping like fingers on glass. Elias lay there, listening to the house settle. Pops in the walls, a distant drip from the bathroom sink. He thought of his brother, lost young to a car accident, how he'd always joked about ghosts watching over them. Superstition, Elias had called it then. Now, alone, it felt less dismissible. The next morning he tackled the attic. The pull-down stairs unfolded with a shower of dust, and he climbed up, flashlight in hand. Boxes lined the rafters, labeled in faded marker. Christmas, books, misc. One caught his eye, shoved into a corner under the eaves. A cardboard box sealed with yellowed tape, unmarked except for a smudge of what looked like a handprint. Curiosity tugged at him. Maybe valuables left behind. He dragged it down to the living room, where sunlight pooled on the carpet. Inside were stacks of VHS tapes, their plastic cases scratched and dusty. No labels, just numbers scrawled in Sharpie. 1 through 12. An old VCR sat at the bottom, cords tangled like veins. Elias frowned. The Millers must have been holdouts, clinging to analog in a digital world. He remembered his own childhood, weekends at his grandparents' watching grainy home movies. This felt different, invasive, like peeking into someone else's secrets. He set up the VCR in the living room, plugging it into the ancient TV that came with the house. The screen hummed to life with static snow. Elias inserted tape 1, the mechanism whirring as it accepted the cassette. He sat back on the couch, a beer in hand, expecting mundane family footage. Birthdays, holidays, something to kill time before he got to work on repairs. The tape began with a timestamp, July 15th, 1998. The camera panned shakily over the same living room, but furnished differently. A floral sofa, knickknacks on shelves. A woman appeared, mid-40s with tired eyes and a forced smile. "This is our new start," she said, her voice tinny through the speakers. "After everything with the accident, we needed this." She gestured to a man off-camera who stepped in, gaunt and unsmiling. Mr. Miller, Elias assumed. They looked worn, like life had chipped away at them piece by piece. The footage jumped to the kitchen, where Mrs. Miller unpacked boxes, humming softly. Then, a cut to nighttime. The camera was handheld, unsteady, pointed at the hallway. "Did you hear that?" Mr. Miller whispered. The lens focused on the stairs, where a shadow seemed to shift just out of frame. Elias leaned forward, the beer forgotten. It could be a trick of the light, but the unease in Miller's voice was real. More clips followed, days blending into nights. Mrs. Miller in the garden, glancing over her shoulder as if called. Mr. Miller fixing a loose board, tools dropping from his hands without cause. One segment showed them arguing in low tones. "It's not just the house settling," she hissed. "Something's here, from before." He waved her off, but his eyes darted to the corners. Elias paused the tape, the screen frozen on a blurry image of the attic door ajar. His skin prickled. Coincidence, he told himself. Old houses had histories. People projected their fears onto them. But the Miller's expressions mirrored his own growing disquiet. The way the house seemed to watch, its silences too heavy. He rewound and played again, catching details he'd missed. In the background of one shot, a mirror reflected a shape that didn't belong. A silhouette in a doorway where no one stood. Elias rubbed his eyes. Imagination, stirred by isolation. Yet, as the tape progressed, the Millers grew more agitated. Mrs. Miller stopped sleeping, wandering the halls at night. "It whispers," she confided to the camera one dawn, her face hollow. "Names from the past." The final clip on tape 1 was dated August 2nd, 1998. The camera was set on a tripod in the bedroom, recording as they slept. Hours passed in fast forward, the timestamp ticking. Then at 3:17 a.m., the covers stirred on their own. Mrs. Miller sat up abruptly, eyes open but unseeing. She turned toward the camera, her mouth moving silently, forming words Elias couldn't make out. The tape ended abruptly, static filling the screen. Elias ejected it, heart pounding in the quiet room. Outside, night had fallen without him noticing. He glanced at the stairs, half expecting movement. The house felt closer now, its walls pressing in. Shaking it off, he grabbed tape 2, curiosity overriding caution. As the VCR clicked and whirred, a faint sound echoed from upstairs, a soft thump, like something falling in the attic. Elias froze, tape in hand. Then from the TV speakers, even though no tape played yet, a whisper emerged. His own name, spoken in Mrs. Miller's voice. Elias stood rooted to the living room floor, the VHS tape still clutched in his hand. The whisper, his name, spoken in Mrs. Miller's thin, trembling voice, lingered in the air, though the TV now hissed with static. He jabbed the power button, silencing it, but the house seemed to hum in its place, a low vibration he felt more than heard. The thump from the attic hadn't repeated, but its echo sat heavy in his chest. He told himself it was a pipe, a loose board. Old houses played tricks, yet his pulse refused to slow. He set tape 2 down on the coffee table, its unmarked case gleaming faintly in the lamplight. Part of him wanted to shove it back in the box, haul the whole lot to the curb. But curiosity gnawed, sharper than fear. The Millers' footage wasn't just home movies. It was a confession, a warning. What had they seen? What had driven them to record their unraveling? He crossed to the stairs, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the gloom. The attic door was at the end of the upstairs hall, a plain wooden panel he hadn't noticed before. It was shut, the pull cord dangling like a noose. He tugged it. The ladder descended with a groan, dust swirling in the stale air. Climbing up, he swept the light across the rafters. Nothing seemed amiss. Boxes still stacked, the handprint smudged one now in the living room below. But the air felt thick, like breathing through cloth, and the shadows seemed to shift just beyond the beam. Back downstairs, he locked the attic door, though the gesture felt futile. The house didn't feel empty anymore. He grabbed another beer, more for courage than thirst, and slid tape 2 into the VCR. The screen flickered, then steadied. Timestamp, August 3rd, 1998, the day after tape 1's final clip. The camera focused on the Millers' dining room, a heavy oak table set with mismatched chairs. Mrs. Miller sat alone, her hands folded tightly, staring at a candle flickering in the center. "We need to document this," she said, voice low as if afraid of being overheard, "for proof, for whoever comes after." Mr. Miller appeared carrying a notebook. "You're scaring yourself, Helen," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. He sat, flipping open the pages, revealing sketches, crude outlines of doorways, windows, and what looked like a figure, faceless, drawn in frantic strokes. "It's just stress," he muttered. "The move, the accident." "It's not the accident," Helen snapped, her eyes darting to the ceiling. "You've heard it too, the footsteps, the voices." She leaned closer to the camera. "It knows we're here." Elias paused the tape, his breath shallow. Footsteps. He thought of the thump in the attic, the way the house seemed to creak with intent. He resumed playback, the footage jumping to nighttime. The camera, handheld again, moved through the house. "Mr. Miller's voice narrated, strained. "It's 2 a.m., something woke us." The lens panned across the hallway, lingering on the attic door. It was ajar, a sliver of darkness within. "I closed that," he whispered. The camera shook as he approached, then cut to static. When the image returned, it showed the backyard, dawn light casting long shadows. Helen stood by the garden, digging furiously with a trowel. "It's here," she muttered, unearthing a small metal box, rusted and dented. She pried it open, revealing a bundle of cloth. Inside were photographs, yellowed, curling at the edges. The camera zoomed in. A family, not the Millers, standing in front of the house. A man, a woman, a child. Their faces were scratched out violently as if clawed away. Elias's stomach twisted. He glanced at the windows, half expecting to see those faceless figures staring back. The tape continued, showing the Millers in the living room, arguing over the box. "We should leave," Helen pleaded. "This isn't our home." Mr. Miller shook his head. "We sank everything into this place. We're not running from shadows." The footage grew erratic. Clips of Helen pacing, whispering to herself. Mr. Miller nailing boards over the attic door, only for the camera to catch it open again hours later. One segment showed Helen in the basement, her flashlight illuminating cobwebbed shelves. She froze, the beam landing on a child's toy, a wooden horse, its paint chipped, rocking slightly as if nudged. No one else was there. Elias's hands were clammy now. He thought of his own basement, unexplored, its door tucked under the stairs. The tape's final clip was dated August 10th, 1998. The camera sat on the kitchen counter, recording the Millers eating in silence. A faint tapping came from the walls, rhythmic like a code. Helen dropped her fork, her face pale. "It's calling again," she said. Mr. Miller stood, grabbing a hammer from a drawer. "I'll check the pipes," he said, but his voice cracked. The camera stayed on Helen, who stared at the ceiling, her lips moving silently. The tapping grew louder, faster, until it wasn't just tapping, it was a voice, muffled, unintelligible, seeping through the walls. The screen cut to black, but the audio lingered, a low murmur forming words. "Stay with us." Elias ejected the tape, his hands trembling. The house was silent now, but it felt like a held breath, waiting. He stood, needing to move, to shake the dread crawling up his spine. He thought of Sarah, how she'd laugh at him for spooking himself. But even her memory felt distant here, swallowed by the house's weight. He crossed to the basement door, the one he'd ignored since moving in. The handle was cold, stiff. He turned it, the door creaking open to reveal a staircase descending into darkness. His flashlight beam caught dust swirling and something else, a faint outline on the wall, like a shadow cast by no one. He took a step, then froze as the door behind him began to close on its own, the hinges screeching softly. From below, a sound rose, a faint rhythmic tapping like fingers against wood calling him down. Elias gripped the flashlight, its beam trembling as it sliced through the basement's darkness. The tapping from below had stopped, leaving a silence that pressed against his ears like water. The door behind him hung half-closed, its slow creak still echoing in his mind. He wanted to turn back, to lock it, and pretend he hadn't heard his name whispered from the TV, hadn't seen the shadow on the wall. But the tapes, Helen's haunted eyes, the scratched-out faces in the photographs, pulled him forward. Something in this house demanded to be known. He descended the stairs, each step groaning under his weight. The air grew colder, damp, carrying a faint metallic tang like old blood. At the bottom, the basement opened into a low-ceilinged space, concrete walls slick with moisture. Shelves lined one side, cluttered with mason jars and rusted tools. His flashlight swept across them, catching glints of glass and metal until it landed on the wooden horse from the tape, sitting alone in the corner. It was smaller than it looked on screen, its painted eyes chipped to blank stares. Elias's breath caught. He hadn't brought it down here. He stepped closer, heart thudding. The horse didn't move, but the air around it felt wrong, heavy, like standing too close to a live wire. He reached out, then pulled back, remembering Helen's frozen stare when she'd found it. Instead, he turned the flashlight to the rest of the room. A workbench stood against the far wall, covered in dust but marked by fresh scratches, as if someone had clawed at it recently. Beyond it, a door, small, metal, set low in the wall like a crawl space. It wasn't on the house's floor plan. Elias knelt, the concrete biting into his knees. The door was locked, its handle rusted but intact. He tugged, but it didn't budge. A faint sound came from behind it, not tapping this time, but a low hum, like a voice caught mid-breath. He pressed his ear to the metal, cold against his skin, and listened. Nothing. Just his own pulse, loud in the quiet. He stood, backing away, the beam of his flashlight jittering across the walls. Upstairs, he locked the basement door and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. The living room felt too bright now, the lamp casting harsh shadows. Tape 2 lay on the table, its case accusing. He grabbed tape 3, driven by a need to understand, to anchor the house's strangeness in something tangible. The VCR word, the screen flickering to life. Timestamp, August 12th, 1998. The footage opened in the attic, the camera on a tripod, focused on the door Elias had checked hours ago. Mr. Miller, George, Helen called him, stood in frame, hammering nails into a wooden board across the door. "This stays shut," he muttered, sweat beading on his brow. Helen's voice came from behind the camera, shaky. "It won't help. It's not just up there." The hammering stopped, and George turned, his face tight with anger or fear. "Then what, Helen? What do you want me to do?" The tape cut to the kitchen. Helen alone, her hands trembling as she poured coffee. She spoke to the camera, barely above a whisper. "We found records at the library. This house. It wasn't just the Millers before us. There was a family in 63, the Harpers. They disappeared. No trace, no bodies. The town buried it." She glanced toward the basement door, visible in the background. "I think they're still here." Elias's skin prickled. He thought of the metal door below, the hum behind it. The footage jumped again, this time to the backyard at dusk. George dug in the same spot Helen had unearthed the metal box. He pulled out something new, a child's shoe, caked in dirt, its laces frayed. He held it up, his face pale. "This wasn't here yesterday," he said. The camera shook as Helen zoomed in, her breathing audible. "It's hers," she whispered. The girl from the photos. The tape grew grainier, the clips shorter, disjointed. Helen in the hallway, staring at the attic door, now unboarded despite George's efforts. George in the living room, reading the notebook, his lips moving silently as if reciting something. One clip showed them both in the bedroom, the camera on the nightstand. They sat on the bed, holding hands, their faces drawn. "We can't leave," Helen said. "It won't let us." George didn't respond, just stared at the wall, where a shadow seemed to ripple, though no one moved. The final clip was dated August 15th, 1998. The camera was in the basement, angled at the metal door. Helen's hands appeared, prying at it with a crowbar. "It's in here," she said, her voice breaking. "I heard her. The girl." The door groaned but held. George pulled her back, his face ashen. "Stop it, Helen. You're making it worse." She shoved him, tears streaming. "You feel it too. It's watching us." The camera tipped, falling to the floor, the lens catching their feet as they struggled. A new sound rose, a child's laughter, clear and cold, coming from behind the door. The screen went black, but the laughter lingered, looping for a few seconds before cutting off. Elias sat frozen, the silence of the house now deafening. He looked at the basement door, the chair still wedged against it. The urge to check it, to see if it was still locked, warred with the instinct to run. He thought of his brother again, how he'd died young, how Elias had always felt he could have done something, driven that night, stayed home. This house felt like that guilt given form, waiting to swallow him. He stood, grabbing the flashlight, and moved to the basement door. The chair was undisturbed, but the handle rattled slightly when he tested it, as if something on the other side had leaned against it. He backed away, heart hammering, and returned to the living room. The VCR hummed, though he hadn't touched it. The screen flickered on, showing static. Then, briefly, a face. Not Helen's, not George's. A girl, her features blurred, her eyes too large, staring directly into the camera. The power went out, plunging the house into darkness. From the basement, the laughter started again, soft and unmistakable, rising up through the floorboards. Darkness swallowed the house, the kind that felt solid, like ink pooling in the corners. Elias stood in the living room, flashlight beam cutting a narrow path through the black. The girl's laughter from the basement, high, sharp, not quite human, still echoed in his skull, though it had stopped seconds ago. The power outage wasn't a coincidence. The house was playing with him, tightening its grip. He fumbled for his phone, its screen glowing weakly. No signal. The battery, full an hour ago, showed 12%. He cursed under his breath, the sound swallowed by the oppressive quiet. He swept the flashlight across the room, the beam catching the VCR, its power light inexplicably on despite the blackout. The TV screen was dark, but he swore he saw a flicker, a ghost of the girl's blurred face. He yanked the VCR's plug from the wall, the cord cold and slick in his hand. The silence deepened, but it wasn't empty. It carried a weight, like someone holding their breath behind him. Elias moved to the front door, desperate for air, for distance. The handle turned, but the door wouldn't budge, as if sealed by an invisible force. He tugged harder, wood creaking, but it held fast. Windows next. He crossed to the living room's bay window, shoving at the sash. Stuck. Panic clawed at his chest. He wasn't trapped, he told himself. Houses didn't trap people. But the memory of Helen's words, "It won't let us," gnawed at him. He forced himself to sit, to think. The tapes. They were the key, or the bait. He grabbed tape 4 from the box, its weight heavier than the others, as if it carried more than just plastic and magnetic strip. He hesitated, then plugged the VCR back in, the power light glowing red in defiance of the blackout. The TV hummed to life, static crackling. He inserted the tape, the machine pulling it in with a greedy whir. Timestamp: August 16th, 1998. The footage opened in the Miller's bedroom, the camera on the nightstand, angled at the bed. Helen sat cross-legged, clutching the notebook from earlier, her fingers smudged with ink. George paced, his shadow stretching across the wall. "We need to burn it," he said, voice low. "The box, the photos, all of it." Helen shook her head, eyes wild. "That won't stop her. She's not in the things. She's in the house." The camera cut to the backyard midday. George stood by a metal trash can, flames licking the rim. He tossed in the metal box from the garden, the photographs curling in the heat. The camera shook as Helen filmed, her breathing ragged. "It's angry," she whispered. Smoke rose, but it didn't drift. It coiled, forming shapes that looked too deliberate, like hands reaching upward. George stepped back, dropping the can's lid. "That's not normal," he said, his voice barely audible. The footage jumped to the basement. Night. The metal door was the focus, its surface scratched now, as if clawed from the inside. Helen's hands appeared, holding a rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer. George stood behind her, a crowbar in hand. "We're ending this," he said, but his voice trembled. He swung at the lock, the clang echoing. The door didn't open, but the laughter came again, louder, not just a child's now, but layered, like multiple voices braided together. Helen dropped the rosary, backing away. "She's not alone," she gasped. Elias leaned closer to the screen, his breath shallow. The tape showed the Millers retreating upstairs, the camera left behind. It recorded the empty basement for minutes, the metal door still. Then, a shadow moved across it, not cast by light, but crawling, like ink spreading. The laughter swelled and the door rattled, a slow, deliberate knock from the other side. The tape cut to static. When it resumed, it was morning, the camera in the living room. Helen sat on the couch staring at the notebook. She flipped through it, revealing more sketches. Doorways, windows, the metal door, and now words scrawled in margins. She sees us. Never alone. Harper girl. George entered, his face haggard. I called the priest, he said. He won't come. Said the house is cursed. Helen laughed, a brittle sound. Cursed. That's too small a word. The final clip was dated August 18th, 1998. The camera was in the attic, aimed at the door, now unboarded and ajar. George stood in front of it, holding a flashlight. If it's in there, I'm finding it, he said. Helen's voice came from behind the camera, pleading, Don't. Please. He ignored her, stepping through. The door swung shut behind him, the lock clicking. Helen screamed, pounding on it, but it didn't open. The camera stayed on, recording her cries, the flashlight beam flickering through the door's cracks. Then, silence. The attic was empty when Helen finally pried it open. George gone. The tape ended, the screen going black. Elias sat back, the room colder now, the air thick with something he couldn't name. He thought of his own attic, the handprint on the box, the thump he'd heard. The house felt alive, its walls watching, waiting. He stood, flashlight in hand, and moved to the stairs. He had to check the attic, to prove it was just a story, just a house. The pull-down ladder creaked as he climbed, the air growing heavier with each step. The attic was as he'd left it, boxes, dust, shadows. But the far corner where the handprint box had been was wrong. The floorboards were loose, pried up, revealing a dark space beneath. Elias knelt, shining the flashlight down. Something glinted, a metal handle, like the basement door, embedded in the subfloor. Before he could move, the attic door slammed shut behind him, the ladder retracting with a screech. The flashlight flickered, and from below the floorboards a faint knock began, slow and deliberate, followed by a whisper. Not his name this time, but a single word. Look. The whisper hung in the attic's stale air, sharp and clear. Look. Elias's flashlight flickered, its beam stuttering across the loose floorboards, where the glinting metal handle waited. The attic door behind him remained shut, the ladder's retraction still echoing in his ears. A mechanical snap, like the house sealing him in. His breath came in shallow bursts, the cold biting at his fingertips. The knock from below the floorboards came again, slow, deliberate, each tap a pulse in the dark. He wanted to run, to claw at the door, but the handle in the floor held him, its pull stronger than fear. He knelt, the wood creaking under his weight. The flashlight's beam caught the handle's edges, rusted but polished in places, as if touched often. The loose boards were rough, splintered, pried up recently. He thought of George Miller, vanishing behind the attic door on tape 4, Helen's screams as it locked. Had he found this too? Elias's hands shook as he gripped a board, pulling it free. Dust clouded the air, and the flashlight dimmed, casting jagged shadows. Beneath was a square hatch, the metal handle attached to a panel no wider than his shoulders. It looked like a trapdoor to nowhere. He tugged the handle. The hatch resisted, then gave with a groan, revealing a narrow shaft descending into darkness. A faint smell wafted up, damp earth, rot, and something sweeter, like decayed flowers. The flashlight barely pierced the gloom, showing only rungs of a rusted ladder bolted to the shaft's wall. The knocking stopped, replaced by a low hum, the same he'd heard behind the basement door. It wasn't mechanical, it was alive, vibrating in his bones. Elias hesitated, his mind screaming to leave it alone. But the tapes, the Miller's desperation, the scratched-out faces in the photos, they weren't just clues. They were a tether, pulling him deeper into the house's secrets. He thought of Sarah, how she'd called him stubborn, how his refusal to let go had driven her away. He couldn't stop now, not when answers were so close. He swung his legs into the shaft, gripping the ladder, and descended. The rungs were cold, slick with condensation. The shaft was tight, brushing his shoulders, the walls rough stone that scraped his knuckles. 10 feet down, the ladder ended at a dirt floor. The flashlight revealed a small chamber, no bigger than a closet, its walls carved with crude symbols, circles, lines, shapes that might have been letters but weren't. In the center sat a wooden box, its lid carved with a single word. Harper. Elias's stomach churned. The Harpers. the family Helen mentioned, gone since '63. He approached the box, the hum louder now, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. He lifted the lid, hinges creaking. Inside was a child's dress, faded blue, stained with something dark. Beneath it, a bundle of letters, yellowed and tied with twine. He untied them, hands trembling, and scanned the first. Dated 1962, it was addressed to Margaret from Clara Harper. The words were frantic. "She's not gone, Margaret. She's in the house. We hear her at night, laughing, moving things. John says it's grief, but I know. She's waiting." Elias dropped the letter, the flashlight shaking. The hum grew into a murmur, words forming just beyond clarity. He stuffed the letters into his jacket, slammed the box shut, and climbed back up, the ladder rattling under his weight. The attic was unchanged, but the air felt charged, like a storm about to break. He shoved the hatch closed, replacing the boards, and yanked the attic ladder down, half expecting it to jam. It didn't. He stumbled downstairs, the letters crinkling against his chest. In the living room, the VCR was still plugged in, its power light glowing despite the blackout. Tape 5 was in the box, waiting. He inserted it, needing to know what the Millers found next, what drove George into the attic. The screen flickered. Timestamp August 20th, 1998. Helen sat alone in the kitchen, her face gaunt, eyes red from crying. The camera was on the counter, filming her as she spoke. "George is gone," she said, voice flat. "I looked everywhere. The attic's empty, but I hear him sometimes, knocking, calling my name. It's not him, though. It's her." The footage cut to the basement, Helen standing before the metal door. She held a key now, small and tarnished, found somewhere off camera. "I know you're in there," she whispered, slotting the key into the lock. The door opened with a slow scrape, revealing a tunnel, its walls dirt and stone. She stepped inside, the camera shaking in her hands. The tunnel sloped downward, the air growing misty. Shadows moved at the edges of the frame, not cast by her flashlight. "Who are you?" she called, voice breaking. The laughter came again, childlike, layered, echoing from deeper in. The tape jumped to the attic, Helen now filming the same floorboards Elias had just opened. She pried them up, revealing the hatch. "This is where he went," she said, her voice barely audible. "I heard him, but it wasn't him." She climbed down, the camera catching glimpses of the shaft's walls, the carved symbols. The footage grew grainy, her flashlight failing. A shape flickered in the dark. A figure, small, in a blue dress, standing at the tunnel's end. Helen screamed, the camera dropping. The screen went black, but the audio lingered. Footsteps, running, then a door slamming shut. Elias ejected the tape, his hands slick with sweat. The letters in his jacket felt heavy, alive. He pulled them out, scanning another. Clara Harper's words. "She wants us to stay. She's lonely. The house keeps her, and now it wants us." He dropped the letter, his eyes darting to the basement door. The chair he'd wedged against it was gone, the door slightly ajar, a faint light spilling from below. Not his flashlight, but something colder, flickering like a candle. The hum started again, louder, coming from the basement. It formed words now, clear and insistent. "Come back!" Elias gripped the flashlight, its beam weak, and stepped toward the door, the light revealing a small figure at the bottom of the stairs, standing still, her face turned away. Elias froze at the top of the basement stairs, the flashlight's dying beam locked on the small figure below. She stood motionless, her back to him, her silhouette framed by the unnatural, flickering light that pulsed from nowhere. The blue dress, faded, stained, matched the one in the wooden box, the one Clara Harper's letters had described. The hum filled the air, no longer a murmur but a chorus, voices overlapping, pleading, demanding. "Come back." His legs felt leaden, rooted, yet something in the house's pull urged him forward, as if the stairs themselves tilted toward her. He gripped the railing, the wood cold and splintered under his palm. The figure didn't move, but her presence seemed to thicken the air, making each breath a struggle. Elias thought of the Millers, George vanishing into the attic, Helen chasing answers into the tunnel. He thought of his own losses, his brother's death, Sarah's departure, the way guilt had carved him hollow. The house knew. It had always known, waiting for someone to fill its emptiness. He took a step down, the stair creaking like a warning. The figure's head tilted slightly, as if listening. "Who are you?" Elias said, his voice hoarse, swallowed by the basement's damp walls. No answer, but the light flickered faster, casting shadows that danced like figures circling him. He descended another step, then another, the flashlight dimming to a faint glow. The air grew colder, the metallic tang sharper, mingling with that sickly sweet decay. At the bottom, the figure turned. Her face was wrong, blurred, like the girl on the tape, her eyes too large, too dark, like wells that swallowed light. She didn't speak, but her mouth opened and the hum poured out, a sound that vibrated in Elias's chest. He stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from his hand, clattering to the concrete. The light went out, and the flickering glow from the unseen source dimmed, leaving only her eyes, glinting in the dark. Elias scrambled for the stairs, but the door above slammed shut, the sound reverberating like a gunshot. He lunged upward, pounding on it, the wood unyielding. The hum grew louder, words forming again. "Stay with us." He turned, back pressed to the door, and saw her closer now, at the foot of the stairs, her small hand reaching out, fingers stained with dirt or something darker. He slid down to the floor, heart hammering, and fumbled in his jacket for the letters. Clara Harper's words flashed in his mind. "She's lonely. The house keeps her." He pulled out the bundle, hands shaking, and tore through them in the faint glow of the girl's eyes. The last letter was different, written in a child's scrawl, undated. "Mama, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall. The house caught me. It won't let me go." Below it, a single line in Clara's hand. "We can't leave her." Elias's breath hitched. The girl, Harper's daughter, the one from 63, hadn't just disappeared. The house had taken her, and the Millers after her. He looked up, her figure now inches away, her face shifting, almost familiar, like a memory he couldn't place. "I'm not staying," he said, voice breaking. Her head tilted, and the hum became a laugh, cold and layered, echoing from the walls. He stood, shoving past her, and ran to the metal door in the basement wall, the one Helen had opened on tape 5. It was ajar now, the tunnel beyond dark and endless. The girl didn't follow, but her laughter did, bouncing off the stone. Elias stumbled inside, the air thick, the walls closing in. His hands grazed the carved symbols, their edges sharp, cutting his fingers. Blood dripped, and the laughter sharpened as if fed by it. The tunnel sloped deeper, the flickering light gone, replaced by a faint glow ahead. Cold, blue, like moonlight trapped underground. He reached a chamber, larger than the attic's, its walls lined with more symbols, spiraling inward to a stone slab in the center. On it lay objects, a child's shoe, a rosary, a hammer, George's, Helen's, the Harpers. A shrine, or a trap. The glow came from above, where the ceiling opened to the attic's hatch, impossibly connected despite the house's layout. Elias's head spun. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, looping its victims through its veins, attic to basement, past to present. He turned to run, but the tunnel was gone, the walls solid behind him. The girl stood there now, her face clearer, her eyes his brother's, then Sarah's, then his own. "Stay," she said, her voice a chorus of all of them, and the house groaned in agreement, the walls pulsing like a heartbeat. He backed toward the slab, his foot catching on something. A notebook. The one Helen carried. He grabbed it, flipping through frantic sketches and words. It remakes itself. It takes what you love. The last page was a map, crude but clear, showing the house's tunnels, its chambers, all circling back to this room. A single note in the margin, "Burn it." Elias fumbled for his lighter, the one he kept from his carpentry days. The girl stepped closer, her form flickering, now Helen, now George, now the child again. He struck the lighter, the flame small but steady, and held it to the notebook. The pages caught, fire licking upward. The girl screamed, a sound that shook the walls, dust raining down. The glow dimmed, the air tightening, but the flame grew, catching the edge of the slab's cloth. The chamber shook, stones cracking, and the girl lunged, her hands cold as they grazed his arm. Elias stumbled back, the fire spreading to the walls, the symbols glowing red before crumbling. He ran for the hatch above, climbing the ladder as the house groaned, a sound like rage and grief combined. The attic was burning when he reached it, flames licking the rafters, but the door was open, the ladder down. He staggered outside, the night air sharp in his lungs. The house blazed behind him, windows shattering, the laughter now a wail. He collapsed in the yard, watching it burn, the flames twisting into shapes, hands, faces, then nothing. The fire trucks came too late, the house reduced to ash by dawn. Elias moved away, never returning to the lot. But at night, in his new apartment, he'd wake to faint knocks, soft whispers calling his name. He'd check the doors, the windows, finding nothing. Yet in the quiet, he'd see it, a shadow in the corner, small, in a blue dress, watching, waiting for him to come back. Well, I hope you got the scare you're looking for. See you next time.